Willkommen in einem Aufregens video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case episode 47 of my game system design series. In this video I'll be exploring Napoleonic commander quality and skill. A common discussion amateurs or even historians will engage in is in determining how good or otherwise a commander was. Was the results of a battle caused by brilliance or stupidity, or was it preordained? We can reasonably assume that when it came to Napoleon himself, his skill was such that even his opponents avoided engaging with him unless they possessed significant superiority. At least that was the story in 1813, and there may have been some merit in this. On the other hand, even Napoleon could fail when he lacked the superiority which his strategic brilliance allowed, which can be seen at Osten-Essling at least. Yet at Austerlitz he was outnumbered and won his greatest victory. How much was due to his brilliance and how much was due to other factors? If we assume, and I think correctly, that Napoleon's skill had an influence, then we need to assume other commanders could also be assessed in the same way, and that their skills could also have an influence in the outcome of battle. Of course, the main issue here is what kind of metric can we use to assess the quality of a commander? I personally have no clear answer to this question, but there are many sources which may give us a clue down which direction we should pursue. One example is figure gaming rules. Figure gaming rules can attempt, or do attempt, to classify a commander's quality, which will have an impact on gameplay. Putting aside the actual game itself, let's look at some examples of this, starting with Empire 3rd Edition. In this chart showing the French commanders, we have an example of classing commanders by some type of quality metric. In this case, a commander's ability to command an army, corps, and cavalry corps is provided. In addition to this professional command skill, we also have an inspirational impact value. The issue with this are that the values are all subjective words, such as superior, poor, or mediocre. Let's try and sort through these words and assess what they mean and what their comparative values should actually be. Drilling down into that table, we can see the professional skill is classed from superior, which is the highest, to despicable, which is the lowest. How the values compare with each other is difficult to assess from this chart, but when you look at the impact in the rules, there are all relative values that we can use. This means the difference between superior and excellent is similar to the difference of poor to despicable. While not as clear, the same applies to a commander's inspirational impact. To make it clearer, you can assign a numeric value to each description, which I will do from this point on. If we start at the highest possible professional command skill, only Napoleon and Wellington are listed. These rules at least consider both these commanders unique. When we move to the next level, excellent, or level 4, we see the list is restricted to only 4 French commanders. Clearly the French are considered as significantly superior to the Allies. We can see 2 of these commanders are superior when commanding corps. We also see 2 values for Massena, which indicates how this commander's skill decreased after 1800. While it's possible commanders did improve or decline, this introduces an additional level of complexity which I personally feel may be too great. As a result, I'll only attempt to assess a commander over their entire career. When we move to the next level, good, or value 3, we get our allied commanders showing up. When we move to mediocre, or level 2, the number of commanders grow dramatically. While some of these commanders at an army level were mediocre, some I feel should not be classed as such. I'm uncertain if Bernadette should be classed as such, for example. The other point is we move from good to mediocre, there doesn't seem to be any average values. I suspect mediocre is more likely the average value of most commanders. Now we move to poor, or level 1, which once again seems to have some unusual entries, at least in my opinion. With the last value, we now complete our list with the despicable, or level 0, army commanders, some which truly deserve to be classed in this manner. For the moment, I'll not be diving into the values for a commander commanding a corps. Often the skills required to command an army of 80,000 were very different from those required to command a corps of 9,000, and this needs to be considered. However, this can be simply resolved by assuming a commander will have a harder time commanding more men, so they need experience to develop those skills. There is another source that I'm using. This is from a board gaming company, SPI. They put a lot of effort in determining various command quality metrics, ranging in value from strategic, operational and tactical, as well as administrative, governance and reliability values. The interesting point is only Napoleon has a strategic value of 5, with many other commanders at 4. This list does not align with Empire 3rd Edition. However, this metric is only measuring strategic ability, which is probably not a factor in the Empire 3rd Edition rules. When we move to the operational values in the SPI value chart, they do align with Empire 3rd Edition army values, that is, the values assigned to commanders that command an army, with both Napoleon and Wellington at this level, along with Devote, which is a difference from Empire 3rd Edition, and I actually tend to agree with the SPI ranking. Staying with the operational level, let's go to 4. We see many familiar commanders from Empire 3rd Edition list, which implies this aligns with their classification of excellent. There are some interesting exceptions, such as Charles being on this list, yet not being on the Empire 3rd Edition list or classification as being excellent. When we move, again staying with operational values based on the SPI values, and we go to level 3, we get many exceptions. It's likely this value aligns with both good and mediocre, that is the Empire 3rd Edition classifications of good and mediocre, although this is certainly not perfect. I suspect this represents what you would consider as average or ordinary commanders. Once again, staying in the operational metric for the SPI rankings, we move to the next level, which is 2. The link becomes even more unclear. I'm uncertain if Brunswick should be classed with Bernadette, but at a strategic level, Bernadette does have a significant advantage. I suspect many of the differences with Empire 3rd Edition is the way this list separates strategic, operational and tactical skills from each other. When we go to the bottom value, we only get a few commanders, with Ney being one. This actually initially really surprised me. In retrospect, I understand now why, but it really was initially a surprise to me. Let's now move to the SPI tactical values, which I think represents the ability to command a smaller formation such as a corps. We see Wellington is on par with Napoleon, which I personally believe is actually quite reasonable at this level. There is a third way of determining quality, and that is to look at all the battles a commander was involved in. This shows all the battles Napoleon won, which is a rather long list. It also shows comparative strength. What is interesting is that normally Napoleon possessed a numeric superiority in his early victories, with the notable exception of Austerlitz and to a lesser extent Eylau. When we look at Napoleon's defeats, we see him almost always outnumbered. At Leipzig and Waterloo, the values only show one Allied army. Overall, he was outnumbered significantly in these two battles as well. It's rather clear that Napoleon was an exceptional commander, but when he was faced with overwhelming numbers, or just superior numbers, he couldn't do or perform miracles. Let's now swing over to the Allied commanders. If we look at Wellesley or Wellington, he was certainly no slouch when it came to winning battles as well. In terms of lost battles, shown at the bottom, he had very few. In this case, a siege, which may not really be a good example. If we flip to Schwarzenberg, we get a very different view. He certainly won more battles than he lost, but these were ones where he had a significant superiority, which could indicate a good strategic grasp, but in terms of fighting a battle, less certain of his skill, or at least I'm less certain of his skill. Now we come to the hard question. We can use actual historical battles as a good guide for how skilled the commander is. In this example, Schwarzenberg won a battle against the Russians and French army. Does this make him a good commander? First, he is outnumbering the Russians and French, so this could indicate his strategic skill was high and he ended up in a position where he was going to win. On the other hand, in the battle itself, and at these odds, he may now not need much skill in order to win. He did not destroy the Russians or French army totally, so that is a factor not evident in this simple chart. In simple terms, we can conclude he is not a fool, but he may well have been a strategically good commander, but maybe only an ordinary tactical commander or operational commander. In the Battle of Leipzig, Schwarzenberg was one of 3 commanders. While he managed to hold against a significant French attack on day 1, which makes him a good defensive commander, the overall Allied army outnumbered the French significantly and must be factored into any conclusion. I personally feel this does indicate he was a good defensive commander, even if he did make one major error. Let's now look at his losses. Dresden was possibly his biggest failure, as he outnumbered Napoleon, yet managed to lose. He did have to deal with other commanders, so the failure could not be placed entirely at his feet, and he was facing the best commander of the era, but perhaps he wasn't so good in terms of attacking. If we move to the Battle of Mourmont, I'm uncertain what this battle proves. He was outnumbered and facing Napoleon, so I would suspect he was always going to lose. The fact he was not totally obliterated is a bit of a miracle. Looking at these battles, what can we conclude? Schwarzenberg was not a fool. He did possess reasonable strategic skill and was good in defence, but less so in attack. However, even this simple conclusion could easily be shot down, as my findings are really all subjective. In conclusion, the skill of a commander often ends up being highly subjective, no matter what system you happen to use. Another wildcard is that we need to define what a commander's quality actually really means. At a strategic level, it would allow an army to always fight an advantage, for example. At an operational level, it would be the ability to get your troops to move more, fight more, and fire more. Part of it is ensuring your troops are in the best position on the battlefield. At a tactical level, it would be knowing when to use different troop types at the right time, ensuring the troops took full advantage of terrain, and, of course, to inspire your men. While it's attractive to attempt as much detail as possible in terms of ranking generals, often the best systems are the simplest one. In most cases, generals would be ordinary, which means they would gain skill working their way up the ranks, and as long as they did not stuff up, they would end up in command of an army. They would perform as expected with minimal individual differences. Then we have exceptional generals. Perhaps we could class them as superior. These are generals who gain superior skill due to some innate ability or through experience. Napoleon seemed to have innate ability and had a long time to gain significant experience. Wellington may well have been in the same bucket, although he had less experience compared, let's say, with Napoleon, but more than most other Allied commanders, or any other commander for that matter, at an army level. Then we have inferior generals who gain their position not on merit or may have simply got too old. Napoleon did slow down as he grew older, although he was still able to display extraordinary skill in 1814. Many Allied generals came from a different era and were old, thus lacked recent skills and were certainly less than energetic. You probably need a very special category for Napoleon and possibly Wellington, and at the other end a very special category for unusually incompetent generals such as Alexander I, who really had no business commanding armies. In such a system, you should end up with a bell curve, with the overwhelming commander category being ordinary in the centre, basically. A reasonable ranking system could look as the following, with Wellington and Napoleon at the highest level and commanders such as Suchet and Wren at the other end. The advantage of this system is all generals are assumed to be ordinary, unless you have a specific piece of information which elevates or drops the quality of a commander. This is a very subjective assessment, and I make no claims to its accuracy, but it probably represents a reasonable starting point if your objective is attempting to rank commanders. And so this concludes episode 47, my video on game system design, in this case looking at Napoleonic commander qualities and skill. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.